So we're going to talk about the fermentation part, and you have the slides, which is a handout, so we can talk. Because the computer is doesn't working very well today, so I'll just talk one talk. Okay, what we'll talk about is alcoholic beverages. So basically what we'll talk about is wine, beer, these two. Okay? But alcoholic beverages, including lots of others. So for example, a wine, basically we'll talk about sugar on the grape. And we also call it cider, if the sugar on apple. And we call it mead, if the sugar fermented, of course it's called fermented, on honey. Okay, and we also call it perry, if the sugar on pear, fermented on pear. Now, when we talk about beer, we'll talk about this. This is one category, okay? The second category we talk about is called malty or malting products. That is including beer, vodka, make sure the spell, vodka, and whiskey. Okay, these story is that the starch needs to be break down, become glucose, and they need amylase. Okay, this amylase coming from malting. However, there is another one which is called a rice one. And a very traditional Chinese product called baijiu. This is the one coming from, also need amylase. But that amylase is coming from aspergillus. Okay, so this is the overall picture. And then we will talk about the detail. We will talk about very much detail in beer and wine, which is a white wine, red wine, and we will mention some like mead and cider and perry. These will be very briefly. Okay. Now, this alcoholic beverages, most of the time is they give the lecture in the food microbiology class. But I think there's a lot of chemistry there related to the fermentation, not only fermentation for the others. So we're going to cover here. Okay, a lot. So we want to talk about these one by one. So first of all, we want to talk about the beer. Okay, we'll talk about it much more detail. So first of all, you need to know the principles behind we making the beer. We directly jump into the final product, alcohol. So we have glucose. Well, glucose usually we go through glycolysis. We generate pyruvate or pyruvic acids. Then this is going through a fermentation called heterofermentation. Will become acetylaldehyde. And then they become alcohol or ethanol. And sometimes carbon dioxide. Okay, now this is an enzyme which is this is an enzyme is decarboxylase. So decarboxylase. This is on your second slide. I just added. This is on your second slide. I just want to add a little bit more here. And acetaldehyde. This is going through because there is an NADH reduced to NAD, oxidized become NAD. So this enzyme, which is dehydrogenase. Okay, then they generate alcohol and the carbon dioxide. Of course, when you drink a beer, you're feeling a strong alcohol, but at the same time, you need to know, because of the beer, the preparation, not only fermentation. Fermentation is only one of the steps. So the final products actually, they have ketones, they have esters, and they have other, some acid products also has. And some volatile compounds. Now, they also contribute to the flavor of the beer. For example, the ketones, sometimes you will be feeling there's a honey flavor of the beer. That relates to the ketones. And sometimes you even feeling about the beer has a little bit like a banana flavor. And that is related to the esters. Okay, so not only alcohol. Now, why I want to make these slides, which is a little bit complicated, lots of the time happen for the small processor. If you find your beer kind of like acid taste, that is not good, which means acetaldehyde has not been fully fermented. What is the taste of this one? This is very much like an unripened green apple. So if you tasted the beer has acid, that means the yeast, we talk about the Saccharomyces most of the time, yeast is leave off the fermentation too quick. So this is something we have to avoid. Okay, that's why I want to draw the pictures here, the first one. Okay, now the second part. What are the important components for a beer? Of course, the number one is water. Okay, water, they do not contribute too much for flavor. However, their impact, the metabolic process, and also the ingredients inside of the water, like calcium, magnesium, sometimes amino acids, and sulfide, carbon, these all will play some role for the metabolic process. Okay? So the water is also important. The second one, we all know that what is important in there is the hops. Is that right? Because the beer when you taste it, we had a slide talk about the hops. You can read this afterwards. We have a slide talk about it. I just jump in here because it's more obvious. The beer when you taste it, it's a bitter. Some people doesn't like it, honestly. It's bitter. That comes from hops. The hops used in the beer brewing process, that is usually, it's a powders of female hops plants. Okay, now why it is tasted bitter? The taste of bitter is because the hops has a lot of ingredients there. They had essential oils. They have resins. Sometimes they have like antimicrobials. But more important is alpha, hops, beta, and the beta hops acids. So hops alpha acids and hops beta acids. Now the bitter taste is coming from the alpha hops acids. And the beta hops acids also play a little bit of role, but not that important. Okay, beta hops acids is also antimicrobials. I did a lot of research when I was a PhD student. So these contribute to the bitter taste. Now what is hops looks like? If we're in a chemistry class, if we want to talk about the chemistry class, chemical structure, it is kind of like this. If I want to make sure it's correct. There is this, and this. This is actually the hops, the structure. This is the one coming from the whole one we call it terpene. Terpene composed by, if you still remember, which is isoprene. Isoprene is a 5 carbon units composed by 5 carbon units. And where are they? This is isoprene. This is also an isoprene. Okay, so this becomes a hops. So number 1, water, number 2, hops. Okay. Number 3, what we're gonna talk is malts. Okay, malts comes from what? Comes from a barley. A barley, we had 2-row and 6-row. If you look at the detail of the structure, 2-row barley is more uniform, and the 6-row barley is kind of more diversified. Later on, contribute to the flavor and the aroma because it will be combined with malts adjunctives. Adjuncts. Okay? Okay, now here is something I want to mention. Why they have a malts? Or this process we call it a malting. You know all these beer comes from, or some of the other vodka or like a whiskey, typically for beer. They are originally coming from starch. And the starch have to go through a process, become glucose. And we know the starch have the amylose and amylopectin, and the amylose is basically is 1,4 glycosidic bonds of glucose. So you can understand the starch is like a lot of glucose combined. And then we already talked about they need amines. Now, of course, there's intermediate products, which is called maltose. Because maltose is the 2 glucose combined. It's a disugar. Then they need amines. And the beer brewing process, we using Saccharomyces. It's different from Saccharomyces and Aspergillosis. Saccharomyces, they do not have amines. So we have to solve this problem. Therefore, we need to use malts. Okay, we need to have this malting process, and which is coming from this barley. And this barley has to go through soaking and going through germination to create the amylase. And then, of course, we have to remove the spent barleys, and also we want to remove those sprouts, some of them. Because once it's germinated, what it looks like, it's like a tail there. Okay? So that's called sprouts. So this is malts, so number 4. Number 3. Number 4 important ingredients is called malts adjunctives. Adjuncts. That's including later on in the modern area, people want to add more flavor or more ingredients into the beer. So they add like a wheat, rice, all those other ingredients. So in the old time, back in like 4000 BC, when the first time people have in Germany, when they have the beer, they only have water, hops, and malts. In a very occasional time, they put the malts with water to germinate a couple of days, and they put the sugar there, then they wait for a couple of days, coming out from a bubbling stuff. It's like a beer. Okay, later on people adding a lot of other ingredients. So this is overall talk about the major ingredients of the beer and what they are, what are they? Okay, then we're going to talk about something detailed. So each step we want to talk about a little bit detail. So the first one we want to talk about is like a malting. Okay, we already talked about this is coming from barley. So barley is like this, lots of seeds. And then we're going through the process we just call it a soak. Of course, it's soaking. Soaking like a 40% to 50% humidified moisture, ingredients, conditions, or we say it. And then also this step we call it steeping process. This usually the temperature control is important, 10 to 16 degrees Celsius. Okay, for how many days? For like a short period of time. This might be 1 to 2 days. Then they're going to go through is called germination. This is important. Germination, a little bit higher temperature. It's about 16 to 21 degrees Celsius. That's 5 to 7 days. When they start to have the germination, this tail will come out. So they started to germinate. When they start to have the germination, that's a very important step. Killing process, or we say it's a killing drying process. This killing drying process usually is in the oven. The oven is heated oven. Okay? The idea is let's it malting to be a little bit dry. And because of it's heated, and you know, when you go through this germination process, naturally there is some sugar there. There is some amino acids there because of the protein there. So during this process, they already contribute to the aroma or the color of the beer. So during this curing process, they already going through Maillard reaction and the possible caramelization. So we talk about these. They already going through this. That's why after curing process, they already become a little bit dark color, dark brown color. Okay, after curing process, they're going to generate is a malt. This is the one will be high, rich amount of alpha amylase and beta amylase. These enzyme has been coming out and are ready to use. And because of this malts, it is like that. So what we have to do, you have to crush it. You have to crush it, okay? So usually they're kneading it or crushing it before they move on to the next step. So that's the first one, called melting. Or we say we ground it, ready to use. Okay, then we move on to the second one, called mashing. We had a slides for these. I just put them together. We had a slides for mashing. So the second step for mashing. The mashing, what we're going to talk about is actually starch underneath the help of the alpha and the beta amylase, then becomes maltose, and finally becomes glucose. This is the process. Okay, how do they do that? You have this malt cell. You add with water, and then you heat it at 50 to 65, 38 to 50 degrees Celsius. So 38 to 50 degrees Celsius. And then what you do, you're going to be adding malt and adjunctors. Now these malt adjunctors, when we mentioned it before, which is like wheat, rice, all those, that has to be pre-cooked. Okay, those has to be pre-cooked at usually 100 degrees Celsius. Has to be pre-cooked. So they add it together. Now this process, it is a little bit advanced or modern time. We call it infusion. That is a little bit modern. We do this. In the old time, people call it using other methods called decoction. That's another method in the old time. Why people can use infusion? Because right now we have a thermometer, so we know the temperature. In the old time, people do not have the thermometer. The decoction process is these malts, they heated, they boiled, take a little bit of pot, then they boil. So let's say you have these malts there. Okay, you have this huge amount of malts, a lot. You're going to take like a little bit to boil it, 100 degrees Celsius. Then you put them back and you mix it. After mixing, because you have something is like a lower temperature, some of them are boiled, then you mix it. It approximately reaches the temperature about 35 to 50. So that's called a decoction. That's the older time to do. Right now they use infusion. Okay, after infusion, when they do this, they're going to increase temperature. This temperature is very important. To around 65 to 70 degrees Celsius. Okay, this increase the temperature is very important to activate the enzyme. Now here is the key. If the temperature is too low, what's going to happen? If the temperature is too low, then the beta amylase will be dominant, will be activated and dominant. Then what is going to happen? The taste will become crispy and little malty. If it's higher temperature, what's going to happen? You activate alpha amylase. So it is gave you a full body malty taste of beer. Okay, so that's a low temperature and high temperature is very important. Now once they reacted a little bit of time, this temperature further go increase to 75 degrees Celsius. This they want to deactivate enzyme. Okay, at this moment, they will generate a product that is called wort. And this wort have to go in through filtration and then generate a final product. At this stage, laundering or laundering wort. Now, why they have to do this laundering wort? The reason is they have to separate liquid part and the spent wort. Okay? Now, at this stage, we are talking about this is a major process for mesh. But also be careful. I didn't draw very well. If this is a barley, the major component is starch, is that right? But don't forget, when these barley, they package something outside, which is undigestible starch. Undigestible polysaccharides is cellulose. These cellulose during this process also will be hydrolyzed with the help of beta glucose, the enzyme called glucanase. However, this process you have to control, also related to temperature. Because if it's too much cellulose reacted with beta glucanase, during this will be impacted the effects of the filtration. Okay, so be careful about that. That's why there's some side impact there for the cellulose of the barley. Not only like the starch. Starch is a major component. So when we talk about here, for laundering wort is also, we only talk about starch. But be careful, that cellulose will impact it. Okay, now at this stage, we have this laundering wort